Hi everyone, this video lesson is for our third day in lesson 13. You are home today, so I'm going to give you a instruction video on this lesson, and then you will have some practice to try, and we will go over this tomorrow when everyone is back in the hybrid all virtual schedule. And so we are going to first do a review question from yesterday, and it's combining what we learned yesterday with comparing positive and negative numbers and the idea of comparing absolute values, which is what we learned on Monday. So you want to try this first, and this is going to be how this lesson's going to go. I'm going to say, hey, try this, and that's up to you to actually try it and do some thinking and then compare with what I say afterwards. So we are comparing the absolute value of positive 4 with the absolute value of negative 5 and writing it using two different formats. And I've kind of set that up for you here. So go ahead and try to figure out which symbol, greater than or less than, goes in each of these. You can pause and then resume. So as we learned on Monday, I want to make sure my pen's working here. The absolute value is a measure of distance. So we have the absolute value of positive 4 as 4 and the absolute value of negative 5 as 5. So I actually wrote those absolute values underneath. That will help me know that the absolute value of 4 is less than the absolute value of negative 5. And then the other way to write it is to switch the numbers around. And if I do that, I also have to switch the symbol around. So I have the absolute value of negative 5 is greater than the absolute value of negative 4. So that's kind of a nice combination of what we've been doing for the last 2 days. And this is our question to try on our whiteboards first. Let me dissect this for you, and then you can try it. 5 friends played a game where they earned positive and negative points. Their final scores were negative 3.5, 2, negative 3, negative 1, and 1.5. What was the highest score and what was the lowest score? So go ahead and pause and try to think about this question. If you are stuck, I'm going to kind of dissect it for you. And you're trying to find out the highest and lowest score. And so the important information you have to work with are these scores from these 5 friends. Hopefully you tried this on your own first and solved and supported your thinking on your whiteboard. I'm going to go ahead and show you the instruction book page strategies so you can compare your answer to that. One of the big visual ones that they lean on heavily, and I think that is really important, is actually drawing a number line and plotting the points on the number line to help you compare. So you can see this number line here, and the blue dots are the scores. However, what's interesting to note is that you do have a scale of half. So you have each tick mark meaning 1/2. So we have 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, and the opposite going on in the negative land. Negative 1.5, 1, negative 1, negative 1.5, 2, negative 2.5, 3, negative 3.5, 4. So you could see my cursor moving along as I was counting. So once you graph these correctly on a number line, it's very easy to see that 2 is the highest because it's all the way over on the right-hand side, and negative 3.5 was the lowest score because it's all the way over here on the left. So visually, using a number line is a great way to find and order numbers in order to help you find the highest and lowest, which was what our question was asking. Another model that the Ready program does talk about is just comparing the positions on the number line And what's to the left or right of what? So -3.5 is to the left of -3. So you can see those two being compared. And then you can see -3 is to the left of -1. So these two numbers are being compared. And it's always in reference to which one is farthest to the left. That's to try to find the smallest. -1 is to the left of 1.5, so it's smaller than 1.5. And then 1.5 is to the left of 2 and making 1.5 less than 2. You can also do the opposite comparison, meaning which one is to the right of the other. So you can see this second model. I'm going to just scroll this up so we can see the number line and this comparison. So you can see that 2, the number 2, is physically to the right of 1.5, and then 1.5 is to the right of -1. -1 is to the right of -3, and then -3 is to the right of -3.5. So anything that's to the right of another number is going to be higher and larger and greater. So those are some strategies that we can use today when we are ordering numbers, and we are actually going to now put them in order, which is our next order of business. So when we have a list of numbers, and in the actual problem, they were listed, and I'm going to write those now. They were listed not in order. -3.5 was the first number they listed. +2, -3, -1, and 1.5. So you'll often sometimes see a list of numbers, and sometimes they'll be integers, they'll be whole numbers, and then sometimes they'll be rational numbers, meaning fractions and decimals and mixed numbers. So when you have a list, you can use that number line and order them accordingly. If I were to look at that number line, I would just start from the left and list them in order. So I would list -3.5 first. If you don't want to use a number line, I would definitely note which ones are negative first if you're going from least to greatest, because you're going to want to put your negative numbers first, and you have to order them from least to greatest. So the one that's farthest away from 0, I'm writing down first, and then I'm just using a comma to list them, then my -3, and then my -1. My -1 is closest to 0. Then I'm left with just my positive numbers, 2 and 1.5, and I can easily order my positive numbers. Which one is closest to 0 is the smallest, which one is farthest away from 0 is the biggest. So you noticed my list of numbers here, if we went back to our number line, would just be looking at these numbers: -3.5, -3, -1, 1.5, and 2. So if you're ordering from greatest to least, I would then start with my positive numbers. And once we've written it in order from least to greatest, it's the opposite when we're going from greatest to least. And then once I take care of all of my positive numbers, I would then think, okay, which one is greater? -1 is greater because it's closer to 0. -3 is a little bit smaller because it's farther away from 0. And -3.5 is the smallest because it's the farthest away from 0. So hopefully that makes some sense. We're going to practice ordering now, and we have different lists. So we can use a number line, and we can use this comparison, what's to the left or right of what. So for letter A, I'm actually going to make a number line to make that strategy clear for you. I notice that all of my numbers are negative. By the way, you can actually try this first. A and B, we're ordering from least to greatest, pause, and then resume to find the answers instead of just listening to my explanation. Actually try it first. Okay, so like I was saying, the numbers in A are all negative. So I need to think about 0 and then writing my negative numbers, always remembering that as we move farther away from 0, my digits themselves get bigger, but because we're in negative land, we are getting smaller. I just have to extend this a little bit. And the farther away from 0 we are, the smaller the number is. So now that I have a number line, it kind of ran into my list, I can graph these points on the number line. And now I can write them from least to greatest. So I'm in negative. So -8 is farthest away from 0, followed by -7, then -6, and then -5. Once I graphed it on the number line, it was really easy to just transfer over into a list. If I didn't want to use a number line, I don't have to. I can just compare the numbers. And it's always important, like for B, you have some that are positive and some that are negative. So I know since I'm going from least to greatest, sometimes a trick is to actually write that down to help you remember which way you're going, least to greatest or greatest to least, so that you don't write it the wrong way. And because my L and my numbers are smaller in the beginning of my list, I want to pay attention to all my negative numbers first. And I can compare 2 at a time. We did that yesterday. So if I'm comparing -8 and 2/10 compared to -3 and 5/10, I know that -8.5 is smaller, farther away from 0 than -3.5. I also have to think about this -5. So I know that -8.5 is smaller than -3.5. However, -5 is going to need to be in my list before -3.5 because -3.5 is the biggest negative number. So I'm looking at all of my negatives and listing them from least to greatest by comparing 2 at a time. So I knew that -3.5 was bigger than -8 and 2/10, but I also had to compare -3.5 to -5, and -5 was smaller. So that needed to come in between -8 and 2/10 and -3.5. Now I just have 2 numbers left, 6 and 8 and 2/10, and 6 can be compared to 8. Even though this is a decimal, the ones place are different, so I can compare that 6 is less than 8, and so that comes first. Now take a moment and we're going to order these next pairs of numbers from greatest now to least. So take a moment and try that first, and then resume when you're ready to check your answers with mine. So what's different about 15A is that you have some fractions. Specifically, we have an improper fraction. And what I would suggest before you start to compare is that you would change this into a mixed number. So this is a +1 when you divide 5 by 4. Just a quick review. We get the whole number 1 and then a remainder of 1/4. Okay, so to double check, you could do that trick where you're multiplying and then adding to get that numerator. But knowing that 5/4 is the same as 1 1/4 will help us when we're comparing. Now, since I have positive and negative numbers, I can use a number line to help me think about this. But my number line here is going to be broken up into different sections because I have a fraction, I'm going to actually want to divide my number line, if I'm using a number line, so I'm showing you that way first, into fourths so that I can know where 3/4 would be. So I'm using a different color just to show you that division. So negative 3/4 is not quite -1 yet. So negative 3/4 is going to be before the -1. And I purposefully showed you that some people like to have 3/4 here sometimes because they see the 1 and then they think 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, but they are using the positive side of the number line. So it's not this first hash mark next to the 0, and it also is not this one right here, because this is 1 3/4. Sorry, -1 3/4. Okay, so it's really important when you're dealing with fractions that you are understanding the negative side of the number line, and negative 3/4 exists between -1 and 0. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of my examples that were showing you that it was incorrect. And let me just make sure that these hash marks are back just so that that is appropriate. Okay, so negative 3/4 is right here. Negative 3/4, so I'll go ahead and label that. Compared to -1, that is a little bit easier to find because of how we've labeled our number line so far. And then we have to find the positive numbers. And I actually don't have those on this number line, so I'm going to have to extend my number line from the 0 and then the 1 and the 2. So I am kind of extending this down here because I ran out of room. And 1 1/4. Remember, we are dividing this into quarters. 1 1/4 now will be, since this is the positive side of the number line, right there. So that's our 5/4, and then our 2. So you can see now on the number line that when we are ordering them, I'm going to use the negative 3/4 first because it's farthest away from, oh, I'm so sorry. Woo! That's not the smallest. We have -1 as our smallest number right here. And then we have our negative 3/4. Those are our two negative numbers. Negative 3/4 is closer to 0. Then we have our 5/4. And notice I'm using the 1 1/4 to think about where it goes on the number line. But when I'm listing it, I'm actually going back to this original form of the improper fraction. And then our 2 is the biggest. It's a little bit trickier when they are in decimals and fractions. So B was all in decimals, so you did not have to convert anything. But again, if you're comparing two numbers, I want you to realize, oh, guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Did I follow the directions? Nope. So even learn from Mrs. Trumble, making sure that you have that G over here and that L over here totally changes your answer. So always double check that you're following that direction and not making that mistake like I did. Okay, it's very easy to do. So make sure you're using that tip of greatest and making sure you're going in the right order. That is a very common mistake. I even made it, as you saw. So the greatest number is going to be 2, followed by 5/4. And if you were thinking as I was explaining, no, that's not what I had, you were on the right track. Thank you. I'm glad I caught that. Then followed by negative 3/4, and then the smallest number is -1. Whew, glad I caught it. Now, The last one, going from greatest to least. Again, I'm going to take my own advice, start with my greatest to least. Okay, that's how I'm ordering these. I'm going to want to look at my positive numbers first. Find the greatest one, the one farthest away from 0 would be my positive 1.5, followed by my 1.25. Then I notice I have a 0 here, and I will now have to compare my two negative numbers, and I want to find the greatest one, which is the number that is closest to 0, and that is -0.5, and -5 is going to be the smallest number. So that was, without using a number line, comparing the two numbers. I compared these two numbers first, knew that the 0 was going to be my middle spot, and then I compared my two red circle negative numbers to each other. So again, you can compare using a number line, or you can compare two numbers looking at greatest to least, least to greatest. Make sure you are not falling into the trap of doing it in the wrong order, following those directions. And so even though this is an all virtual day, I would like you to try some problems on your practice and problem solving page. It is in a Pear Deck format, not Kami. So you can find that in your stream of the Google Classroom. And I did list 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. Those questions are in the Pear Deck. I do have a bonus question. It is noted on the Pear Deck that it is an optional bonus question for you to try. And we are going to go over this concept again and these questions tomorrow in class. So please give it a try for right now, and then I will see you tomorrow. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.